And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And it's great to have a guest who actually I saw speaking the other week at a rally. We'll maybe end on that topic, but it is Howard Cox. Howard, thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure. I'm really honoured to be here.
It's great to have you and wanting to delve into all of your background on the motorist who has been in the crosshairs of most of the governments, certainly in the last number of decades, and we'll get into all of that. But you can follow Howard. That is his handle at Howard C. Cox on X on Twitter and fairfueluk.com, the website, and we'll get into that that he started in 2010. But before we jump in, just for our viewers and listeners, just want to thank you for your support. You can continue. Thank you for your £5 a month, £10 a month. It helps us as we're approaching 800 interviews. And you can go donor box or give send go. We really appreciate those small amounts for many of you, and it helps us continue bringing you interviews. So always want to thank you because I don't do it enough. But back to Howard. Howard founded Fair Fuel UK back in 2010, really a pressure group to stand up for the motorist. And he has said they've saved £200 billion in tax rises, duty, VAT. And he stood for reform. So Plitty stood in the London mayoral candidate last year and also stood for reform in the general election down in Dover, just on the coast there, and came second with 24% of the vote in reform. I think got nearly 100 second places. And Howard was one of those who did very well and pushed the Tories into third place. But we'll maybe touch on that a little bit. But Howard, get your background. What led you up to starting Fair Fuel UK in 2010?
Well, thank you for having me on. As I say, it's very, very simple. I was doing some consultancy work for small businesses, helping them trade out of troublesome situations. And I had several logistics firms that were my clients, my customers. And there was a common denominator in all of them that, when you come to one particular trucking firm, that's got 50 trucks, and most of them were articulated 40 tonners, big jobs. And I remember sitting down with the MD of this particular company, and we were having a cup of tea, and it caught my eye on a spreadsheet on his desk, which was basically his P&L, his profit and loss. And there was a little area which is costs. And then I saw a line, fuel, and obviously that's mainly diesel at the time. And I said, "Is that really true, your figure?" And he said, "Yeah." And it was 42% of his costs were fuel. And of that 42%, 70% went to the government in tax. So that just said, what? And it was all an eye-opening to me. I mean, we always knew that we were paying quite a lot at the pumps. And at the time, we were the highest tax drivers in the world. And we're still pretty high up, I'm afraid, even though we've been successful campaigning. And had it not been for Fairfield UK campaigning, we would have been paying a lot more now. And so I just got into this and I said to the MD, why don't we set up a campaign and try this? Because the motoring associations and the trade associations at the time, the Freight Transport Association, the Road Haulage Association, the AA, the RAC, didn't seem to have any teeth to try and take on the government. And obviously their interest was mainly on actually making a profit for their associations. I didn't have that interest in this thing. So we decided to set this up, and we gave birth to Fairfield UK. And at the time, George Osborne was Chancellor. Cameron, was Prime Minister, and we managed to get the first ever e-petition in government. These e-petitions now they're used willy-nilly now, but at the time there are two particular e-petitions at the time. One was the riots happening in around Brixton and around those areas in Croydon, all those sorts of things, real problems. And the other one was our one, and we managed to get 100,000 sign-ups within a matter of 3 or 4 days. And I remember, it's a long time, my wife would tell me that she didn't see me for 3 or 4 nights because I was sitting in my office non-stop with a glass of red sitting by the side of me, just working social media. And at that point, social media wasn't as powerful as but it was becoming a force to be reckoned with. And we got 100,000. We also, which are very good at the time, we managed to get several Tory MPs on board who were very much in favour of actually making sure fuel duty never went up, because at the time, Gordon Brown left a thing called a fuel price escalator. If you remember that, people might remember that sort of thing. But what that meant was that at every budget, or maybe even financial statement, what would happen is that fuel duty would go up by inflation plus an amount, 1p, 2p, or something like that. And if we extrapolate what would have happened if that stayed in place till now, pump prices would be over £2 per litre. And you know, it would be, well, we would be in recession. I'm not sure if it would have carried on that way, to be fair. But having said that, we made sure it didn't happen. And what Fairfield UK did, working with great MPs like Robert Halfon MP for Harlow, brilliant MP. He's no longer an MP now. He saw the light and got out quick. But mostly the backbench Tories at the time, and I was secretary to an all-party parliamentary group which totally and utterly supported it. And believe it or not, there's a lot of Labour petrol heads also support the process, because we're still seeing something like 60% of everything goes into our tank goes to the government in tax. And one of those taxes is called VAT, which is on the fuel duty as well. So you've got a tax on a tax. And when you see that something like in America, Germany, Spain, Italy, France, all are paying less tax than we are, what our government doesn't seem to see, or most governments have not seen to understand, is that if you incentivize road transport, you actually improve things like lowering inflation. Because when inflation is announced, you know the figures. The next sentence is, oh, it's because fuel prices went up or fuel prices went down or something. It's so intrinsically linked close to inflation. And everything we buy is related to, you know, fuel costs. Everything is delivered. And a trucking company with a 40-ton truck does 8 miles to the gallon. And so a 1p increase in fuel duties for one truck is about £5,000 to £6,000 extra a year in running costs, which means the bosses of that company can't invest in cleaner fuels or even more staff or training or health and safety stuff. All those sorts of things are put aside because they've got to pay a tax on an essential resource they can't do without.
I want to divide up because you've got the motorist, someone driving their car to work or for pleasure, getting around, and then you've got the haulage firms, actual transport, and that's me something separate. But I was looking up and realized there were about half the population have a driving license. I think there are 30, 34, 35 million full driving licenses. So this is an issue that everyone really should be thinking about. The vast majority of people who can vote, who are at the age of voting, will have a driving license, and therefore there is that connection. Even if you live in a city like London, you still understand the importance. So how is it that we don't have representatives or groups supporting you? You mentioned some of them are just in for profit, but this is a large chunk of the electorate. Surely it's a win-win to have an organization actually supporting the motorist, and yet there doesn't seem to be.
Well, I when I started up Fairfield UK, I did have the backing of the RAC and the RHA and FTA. They did actually fund, but they got very worried about me to some extent as we've moved on in recent years, because I don't support net zero.
Yes.
And that's the problem, Peter. Most of these organisations have bought in totally to net zero. And it doesn't mean to say I don't want clean air and I don't want to have the environment that's good for our future, and I don't want to make sure I don't believe we need to decarbonise. What we need to do is just make sure we stop pollution. There's a difference. And at the moment in time, I'm afraid people like the logistics companies, all of the logistics companies, 98% of the logistics companies rely on diesel. And you can't have a battery driven 40-ton truck. The battery will be 40 tons. You'd have to tow with it. That's the sort of the stupidity of this. But they've all bought people like the AA, Edmund King, promote cycling. Again, I'm not anti-cycling, before your viewers and listeners are worried about what I'm saying here. I'm pro-cycling, but we shouldn't be taking half the roads up in London for cycle lanes, which most of the cyclists don't use, and they go through red lights, and they're pretty militant in that respect. To cause so much congestion. Just ask any black cab driver, black taxi cars. They know everything. They're the sort of fountain of knowledge. And I promise you, every time I go into a cab, a lot of them say, Howard, you're not paying any for a cab because of what you're doing for us. Because most of them at the moment are being penalised. And I could come on to the other particular problem, like ultra low emission zones and low traffic neighbourhoods and uh,
We'll get into that, and obviously the taxis fit into that because the new black cabs are all battery powered,
yeah.
all made in one company, and you got all that. But what were your conversations like with MPs? Because I guess our MPs are just wanting, basically like a drunkard, just wanting their next drink, and wherever they can get the taxes for that, they grab them, and the motorist has become the cash cow that seems to have been accepted, and our media aren't really concerned, and it's crept up and up and up. But what were your conversation like with it? Because I guess in 2010, a conservative government, because they were conservative at some point.
Yeah.
So you probably thought actually the conversations are going to be normal conversations after Blair. So, what was it like engaging with the APPG and talking to them about Fairfield UK?
Well, I have to say it was relatively easy with most of the backbench Tories. There's some great Tories, people like Craig McKinley. We called him the Bionic Lord. Now he was chair of the APPG, and he's a close friend. As I say, Robert Halfon. And there's I can Peter Aldous, and I can Martin Vickers. There's loads and loads of them. Andrea Jenkins. People now with Reform, and you'll find that most people are kindred spirits in related to actually keeping taxation low. And when you think about it, and this is important for people to understand, this is an essential tool we have. It's most of the time. I mean, and we have to say this, that most of the time people need their car, as you said, to get to work or get to medical appointments, drop their kids off at school, all those sorts of things, because our public transport is in dire straits. And yes, London's brilliant, and there's one of my problems at the time, because the mainstream media, obviously, they live in London. They can get on a tube, go anywhere in 3-4 minutes. It's easy. Was reasonably cheap. Those are the sorts of things I was up against. But outside of London, 80, and you think of all of the TVs and radio stations, something like 80% of the population are outside of good public transport areas. And those are we got. And I also worked with a very good economics group, who well renowned, led by a guy called Douglas McWilliams, who was actually advisor to the government on many occasions. And but that was my biggest cost, was paying for economic analysis of what putting up fuel duty would do to the economy. And so, sitting with these backbench Tories, to go back to your original question, what was it like talking to them? It was relatively easy, receptive, and even I give George Osborne his credit, because they were only in for 3 or 4 months, and we were only campaigning for 2 or 3 months. And in the March budget in 2011, he reduced fuel duty by a penny. It was going to go up by about 4 to 5 pence, and it came down a penny. It's unfortunate at the time, and I feel sorry if he was a bit upset with me, because he didn't get the credit for that as much, because the dollar strengthened, the pound weakened, which means, as you know, oil is priced in dollars, and therefore no one could see it actually at the pumps as much as they'd like to. But he did make that first step, which was actually freezing it, and we've enjoyed 15 years of a freeze in fuel duty. No other tax or levy has been frozen for that long, no whatsoever. And in fact, we've come down by 10%. We were something like 58.95p per litre fuel duty. We're now 52.95p, which is 6p less. So we've come down 10%. And and so if this is what I find fascinating with the Labour government, because at this budget this year, or last year, just gone, with Rachel from Accounts, we know, bless her cotton socks, she listened to my campaign. I took a petition to 10 Downing Street with mainly Tory MPs, 100,000 signatures, 120,000 signatures, which we collected in a matter of days again. We delivered it to them, etc. We did all the campaigning possible. We had a reception for all MPs. And I give credit to a lot of Labour MPs. They didn't put their head above the parapet, but privately they told me, we support what you're doing, Howard. And so we did get a freeze in duty in the last year, which I didn't expect. I thought immediately Labour get in, they're going to go, as you said, cash cow motorists. They're the easiest of targets, that we can go for their wallets as easy. And we can always dress it up in the fact is we're fighting going to net zero, the green agenda. And so that's what I've been up against, and I still think that's going to be hard. And I got a feeling in the March statement coming up now, the financial statement, she might bring back the fuel duty to increase it in maybe in September, as opposed to keeping it frozen until next budget in 2026. But
Well,
it was a very difficult time, and it was 12 hours a day campaigning for years, and I don't know why I do it. I don't make any money out of this, and but I'm passionate about the fact that we need to actually get our fiscal sort of common sense in place, and at the heart of that is one of those is transport costs.
well, transport costs, and I'm sure the motion will be attacked as you said, because the government seem to have no clue how to run an economy. Not that the last government ever had a clue
Good
either.
point. Good point.
A plague on all of their houses, 100%. I'll never trust a Tory again. But um, I can understand the tax rise, sin taxes on alcohol and tobacco. I think it's completely unfair, but I can understand there being maybe an argument there. But you look at the motorist and you look at transport costs. It is horrendous. It's as if our government don't know that an economy, the success of economy, is based on on energy, the cost of energy, the availability of energy, and we are an island. Maybe our MPs haven't realised that actually we're an island, and actually it can be costly to get goods in or out. But that understanding of transport linked with energy and how that actually means whether an economy will work or not, it seems so our MPs are clueless on that.
Well, they are, and it's interesting that throughout the 15 years, and bear in mind, I've worked with different chancellors and different people in various areas, and we've had 3 or 4 elections. We had a guy called Boris Johnson, if you remember rightly, and he was a big fan of Fairfield UK, but equally he wanted to make sure you bring in ULEZ in London, and the Boris bikes and things like that. So there was a bit of a paradox in terms of the way he operated, and the electric vehicles. And I'm pro electric vehicle, and I repeat that I am, but I'm not pro us being forced to drive them when and this is an important point to get across, and it's very important to people understand. When did this wonderful Western world decided to actually sort of ban new petrol, new diesel vehicles? And we started off at 2040. Boris came in and he moved it to 2035. Then suddenly he woke up one day and said moved it to 2030. We did a work with the CBR, the economics group I mentioned earlier, to prove that the cost of the 2030 ban on our economy is 5 times more than the environmental benefits. 5 times. Now, not just a few bits, 5 times more the environmental benefits. Every single household, that 2030 ban is going to cost £14,000, even if you don't drive. And this is the irony of it. And thank God that Rishi Sunak did listen to that report and present it and moved it back to 2035. But hey, we've got Labour in there and they brought it back to 2030. So my job is not done. I'm still fighting like that for that. And it's just stupid, the whole aspect of actually recognising they have stopped manufacturers and they're putting, these penalties on if they don't produce enough EVs each year. And by 2030, 80% of their production must be EVs. 80%, 8 out of the, and if they don't meet that target, for everyone over the top, they've got to pay something like £20,000 to the government. So they're intervening in the markets, and if they'd allowed them to carry on and let cleaner fuel technology to evolve, we have a thing called Euro 6 now. Euro 6 is the actual standard for right across Europe, and you'll find that diesel's even cleaner than petrol now. That's the sort of level we are. If they'd allowed them to carry on developing to Euro 7, Euro 8, or Euro 9, we've already emissions have fallen by something like 50% since 2010, and we're still driving diesel and petrol cars. So it goes to show we've got cleaner diesel and petrol cars, and this is the problem. And you quite rightly say these people I've been dealing with, and a lot of them, the people that were on the back bench, then went into the Treasury, suddenly changed their spots. They went from, yeah, we totally agree with Fairfield UK, and the next stage, you go into the Treasury, is how much more can we get out of the driver? And that's the thing that is it's amazing, that transition from those green benches to the cabinet or to a ministerial position really impacts on their common sense. And I don't know how we're going to go with this. I'm 70 years of age now. These sorts of things now. You know, I should be tending my petunias, Peter. I shouldn't be. But the way things have got, because of the campaign, we'll come on to this later. People like Richard Tice asked me to stand for London Mayor because of the ULEZ issues and all those sorts of things.
Well, I want to get on that, but the thing with it's funny, the government could find money for subsidies for electric cars that I had to pay driving my 7-year-old diesel car. I had to pay those subsidies so people
Yep.
could spend 60, 70, 80,000 pounds on a new electric car. Obviously, they don't really need the subsidy if they can spend that. But then the weight, I mean, there's so many parts of it, but when you take I think it's looking at a new Kia Niro full battery, it's 2.2 tons. And you think, how much extra will the government have to raise to fix all the roads and build all the car parks if they push ahead with these? None of these are. It's not a joined up thinking. It's a recipe for disaster, really.
You're absolutely right, and we can come on to the potholes bit in a minute because we have the quality of our roads in this country is disgusting. I mean, it really is. And yes, you alluded to it. Electric vehicles are heavier than diesel and petrol cars, and they don't pay any tax. And the irony of this whole thing is, you get the smug EV driver. I drive a hybrid bike, half EV. It's brilliant. When I drive in London, because you never get above 20 mile an hour, it's electric vehicle. And as soon as I get up outside of London, I'm up above 30 mile an hour if I'm not caught in the cameras. It goes back to petrol, and it's a very sensible thing to me. That's common sense. I've got no problem with that. But it's a self-charging one. The petrol is charging the battery up. You don't have to plug the bloody thing and get worried about range anxiety. The thing is, with the really upsets people. You made the point is that you're subsidising this, and what market do you know whereby the government interferes with and gives money to one set of products and then bans its competition in 2030. I mean, I'm still looking. If I had enough money, and if anyone's listening here to invest in this, I've wanted to take the government on the fact whether that's legal, interfering in markets. And I've already spoken unofficially to various a barrister or two, and they think there is a way to do it, and it's got to be framed properly. But the thing is, the government are interfering, and now. And manufacturers are now moving out of this country. And guess what? They're not. You won't be stopped from buying a diesel or petrol car from China or from anywhere like that. You've got to drive it back over here, obviously. But those sorts of the stupidity on this. Just what we should do is incentivize clean fuel technology. Yes, please do that. No problem at all. But allow the market dictate with what is the best vehicle for a person. Because yes, and a little electric car that driving around London, picking up the kids and that sort of things makes a lot of sense. It does, but let the market decide. And every person there's an old age pensioner lives up the road from me here, who's got a diesel. I think it's about 22 years old. Still does 70 to the gallon. She only does about 50 miles a week, and yet she's being penalised completely by this whole situation. And there's no way she can afford an electric vehicle. No chance in hell. This whole thing, the scrappage scheme in London, that doesn't exist anymore. That didn't touch the sides and things. And the biggest, I think, sufferer of all these things are small businesses. The plumber, the electrician, the white van man type people. And I've got 1.7 million people have signed up since 2010, and probably 40% of those are small traders.
And of course, people bought electric cars. Well, if they had the money to buy it, it could have been for tax reasons. You didn't pay your fuel duty. You didn't pay VAT because it's low VAT on electricity. And supposing you didn't pay to drive in London because electric cars didn't cause congestion. So very confusing. But then, so you've got all of that, and people were nudged into it, and now they're finding, well, their electricity costs are 2 to 3 times higher. And suddenly it doesn't make as much economic sense for them financially. And it seems though the government tell the public to do something because it's good, they do it. And then they come in later on and just hit them with tax rises, and there's not much you can do about it.
Well, you remember back in the day, we were told to drive diesel
Yep.
back, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and Gordon Brown was right behind that. And of course, then we're now diesel is the poison of all poisons. And, these are the sorts of things we get. And as far as the electric vehicle, I'm afraid those smiles are going to be wiped off their face in March. They've got to pay vehicle excise duty on electric vehicles. And also the cars are over £40,000, which are, you will have to pay something like £600 tax every year, including electric vehicles. So, it's all going to disappear. And then because more people are moving to electric vehicles, not as many as they'd like, obviously fuel duty revenues are going down. And, we had, the motorist generates about £1 billion per week to the government, 50 billion a year, something like that, of which 36 billion or 35 billion, sorry, was fuel duty plus VAT. It's now dropped to around about 8 billion less than that now because of the electric vehicle, and that's not been replaced. So we're moving into the next stage of things of pay per mile, and that will never be ever fair unless, it can only be based on weight. And that means, I'd be good to see cyclists paying to use the roads to the upkeep of potholes as well, all the way up to a truck, those sorts of things. But that can never be fair because I'm afraid that will impact. I don't know how they're going to measure that without actually, actually invading our private lives.
Well, I think I read somewhere that we have 247,000 miles of roads, a quarter of a million. And of course, you could have cameras like they have in parts of Europe. But you're right. The fear is that we will all have a black box and that will record everything we do. And that has Big Brother implications as well. And that seems to be the easier and cheaper way, because to put up the cameras, as we know in London, hugely expensive. And of course, the companies get them back by fining you if you're 5 inches within certain areas. But it does seem to be a Big Brother issue whenever everyone has a box and say, don't worry, government will look after you, they'll keep you safe, they can track you. I don't want to be tracked.
No, that's exactly right, and that's my biggest fear as well. There are ways to get round it in this way. Every time you have an MOT, take some mileage, and you get an annual fee, like your electricity bill or something like that, where they do that. There is a logic and there is a way around this sort of thing. But the point is, the cheapest way to do this is on fuel duty, because every single forecourt owner is actually a tax collector. These are the sorts of things which we could do. And thank heavens for Donald Trump. With a bit of luck, Starmer might wake up and say, okay, let's let diesel and petrol keep being sold. The problem is we're only 4 years away from that decision. And most manufacturing lines in this country are now geared up for electric vehicles, not internal combustion engine. And that is the big issue for, I don't know where this is going, Peter, in many respects. I'm going to be fighting like mad for common sense. And I even fight for electric vehicle drivers because I want safer pothole roads. And this is an interesting thing. The cost of repairing all the potholes in this country is about £14.5 billion. I repeat, £14.5 billion. The cost of repairing the roads completely, not just the potholes, is just £1.5 billion more. 16 billion. So because this is the stupidity of it. They say, oh, we put 500 million in pounds the last budget. That's sticking plaster stuff. It really is. It's not getting to the root of these things. And I believe there's going to be more fatalities, particularly for motorbikes and cyclists. When there's a puddle coming up, you think, how deep is that puddle? And you can't get out of it. And I feel for cyclists in that way. And so, again, your cyclist viewers on here, I promise you that I'm fighting on your behalf to get our roads in some situation where they are 21st century rather than, just for horse and cart.
So that we spent 13 billion, I think, on Ukraine. That could have fixed our roads.
Yes.
That seems a better way of spending that money.
Well, there's overseas aid and there's net zero. There's all those. We can go on forever about what could be saved. And there's so much, but we've got this certain person, the most dangerous person in our country. That's Ed Miliband. And he's Starmer's allowing him to run riot over people. Net zero is not the way forward. We need to reduce pollution. We need to have a clean air we breathe. But you don't do it by telling people you can't do this. Put heat pumps in and all these sorts of things. And you're going to get cheaper energy when there's a great big turbine going round for you. I walk my dog just down the road down here, a place called Rye Harbour on the Kent coast. and it's very beautiful. And you often see little dinghies coming in with lots of people on them, by the way. But I'm regularly down there, and they've got something like 50 wind turbines down there. I never see them all on. And then I'm told to get them started, they need a diesel generator to get them started.
And of course, they're all made abroad. So a lot
Yeah.
of the wind turbines, what Netherlands had a big industry, and of course all the solar panels that we cover, all the farmland that's made in China. And you wonder again, this doesn't. If it was manufactured in the UK, there could be an argument for that because it benefits manufacturing. It doesn't benefit us at all.
No, and it's going to get worse. So the point is, we're importing more cost, and we got to recognise this. And I understand there's a new gas field of worth about 112 billion been found off the Lincolnshire coast. Only yesterday it was announced, and it's sitting there, and that will give us enough energy for 10 years. But it's a no-brainer. I mean, if I was sitting in that seat in number 10, I'd sit there. That would save us this. That would say, let's do it. We're responsible for 1% of the emissions, the bad emissions in the world, and we're going to go down to about 0.9%, and it's going to cost each of us something like £36,000 to get there by 2050. It just,
I can imagine Ed Miliband just wanting to drop dynamite into that, burn it all up quickly, and then charge us all some kind of tax system so that we actually pay for the pollution of that, and then no one can use it. I mean, we have oil under our feet, we have with shale under our feet, and yet we choose not to use it. And you're right, Trump, utter common sense, saying drill, baby, drill. I couldn't imagine Ed Miliband ever uttering those words.
well, no, I've got a few words I'd like to say, but I won't do that. But you're in the situation, we buy most of our gas and things like that, and it's shipped over in diesel ships. You got liquid propane gases and things like that coming across, in these special, huge cost. When you quite rightly, a bit of fracking, and it doesn't cause massive earthquakes and things like that. And that's the problem. There's this issue that want to look good, and we want to lead the way. If I hear another politician, we should lead the way. No, we don't. We should actually lower the costs for people in this and make our markets more competitive. We went up by 0.1%, didn't we, in GDP? It was announced yesterday, and we're celebrating that. According, the Labour are. It's ludicrous. That's growth. In the States, it's now 2 to 3% going up each year, and they've got the cheapest energy in the world.
Well, they do, because again, and Trump is going to return money back to people's pockets and trust the citizen. God forbid in Europe we would ever trust the citizen to do the right thing. Can can I? We mentioned ULEZ, the low
Yeah.
emission zone, and of course, then there was congestion charge. And I think, as you mentioned in passing, Boris Johnson ULEZ. People forget that actually it was Boris Johnson, the great libertarian, the great conservative, that started ULEZ conversation and implemented that. But again, motorists already pay. You're right; they pay what 40% in the fuel duty, 20% VAT. You pay for the privilege of owning a car for a year. Even though you bought it, you have to pay tax to be able to use it and own it. And now you're told you need to pay actually to drive into cities. Tell us a little bit about, again, from your perspective, fighting for the motorists. How did you see that the rollout of ULEZ with cameras everywhere, and again, drivers getting fined huge amounts?
Well, that's the reason why Reform asked me to stand for London Mayor. I was asked in 2023 by Reform, look, and it took me 2 or 3 months to say yes, because I'm apolitical in all of this, and I mean that. But I'm apolitical, but I'm a Thatcherite at heart, and low tax, small state, protect our borders, that sort of thing. So, and that's why Ben Habib, I understand you interviewed him recently, and Ben and I are very close on that and working together. The thing is about ultra low emission zone, we have the congestion charge, which is the central thing. To some extent, there is a logic in that, but we don't want the centre of our city to be snarled up. But that could have been done by proper transport equations, and how traffic lights are phased, and all those sorts of things, and making better parking areas and things like that. All those sorts of things. The ULEZ was brought in, 2019, was it? I think it's something like that. And that was for the area which was inside the South Circular, North and South Circular, those sorts of things. And then came on in the lead up to the election last year for London Mayor, which I stood for. it was going to be expanded to the M25. And he did a public consultation, the Mayor of London at the time, Sadiq Khan, and completely ignored it. He fiddled figures. He lied about figures that were from Imperial College regarding actually the impact of what ULEZ had done in terms of actually lowering emissions. They hadn't. I presented data from the fact there's more pollution on the underground, on the platform level, than there is at roadside. And I'm about to come out with a study in the next month, which I've updated this report for when ULEZ extension was increased to the M25 area. And I've looked at the underground at the tube stations in those expanded areas. And I've gone out with my little trusty little emissions detector, which has been approved. Is approved by the WHO. We won't mention them at the moment, but I've compared roadside outside the tube station to actually down on platform levels, or even on platform levels actually which are above ground. And I can tell you that it's about 3,000 to 4,000% more particulates, which he's taking huge amounts. He's putting up the fares to allow people to breathe that, and he keeps it quiet. And I worked with a couple of whistleblowers who actually were involved in clearing up some of the dust in the underground. And it's not just things, the usual particulates. There's some there's some incredibly dangerous chemicals down there flying around and coming out through vents at roadside level as well. But the point is, already the roadside is clean. You don't have to worry about it. Cars are cleaner. If this was 20 years ago, there'd be a lot. How many people do you see smoking and horrible things coming out of their exhaust? You don't. Most are pretty clean. But down at the underground level, I stand there, and these guys, these whistleblower guys who work down there, have shown me pictures of themselves. They've got goggles on. They take their goggles off. It looks like a skiing. We've been skiing. Which I understand you'll be going soon. But this is the hypocrisy of the ULEZ. The whole thing is just a cash grab. And the irony of this, there are, and I don't condone this criminal behaviour, but the damage to the cameras around, but they're called blade runners, I think they're called. I know some of them. I know them quite well. And these are good, honest, decent people who are frustrated by what's happening and being forced upon them. And the cost of actually running ULEZ, this program, is actually probably about the same amount as the income coming in. So what's the point?
And you see those Blader. I mean, it takes a lot to rile the British, and we've all been frustrated at mass immigration, attacks on motor, a whole range of stuff, and still people are shrugging their shoulders. Where in France they get on their yellow vests and they cause chaos. But the Blade Runners are an indication of where we are. That you can only push people so far and squeeze them so far, and then they have to fight back because it's natural defensive instinct. It's you need to survive, and if the government are just going to destroy you by taking you work hard and they just take your money, then what's the point in doing that? So it is a natural response, I think, to oppressive governments.
You've got it spot on. I'm not sure if you remember this, but back in the 2000, when there was the road haulage, which they blockade London and things like that, a lot of people have asked me that running Fairfield UK, why am I not more militant? We've been successful by producing objective data and proving what it means to the economy, what it means to people, without basically pissing off people, who actually, in London. What we do see on the other side, these environmentalists, these zealots, these green zealots, they glue themselves to the roads and you name it, and they cause things. They throw paint over priceless works of art. They knock down statues and things like that. Basically, really do upset people going to their daily lives. We are seeing a bit more of it now with the farmers, and I'm working with the farmers now. They're doing. They drove their tractors through London and everything. Some people were saying, "Oh, they blocked it up," emergency vehicles getting through. They haven't done that. That's definitely, been brought in to rubbish them. But I think there's only so much people can take, and at the moment, I think we're on the verge of. I wouldn't say a revolution or a rebellion, but I do believe there's going to be much more, and if opposition, and it's going to be militant opposition to this government, because this government are a bunch of pathological liars, inept politicians as well, and fiscally inept especially. So so watch this space of what I'm going to do. I'm looking at lots of opportunities now to actually make sure the motorist is not going to be hit hard just for the sake of being hit hard.
And of course, I need to touch, and then we'll end on reform. But the attack on small businesses, because you're right, most from Northern Ireland, and it's a car only culture. You can't get around. It would take you hours to get a bus around, or wait for a train. It's not public transport connected, and therefore you're relying on cars. And if you're pricing people out of a car, which is essential in many parts of the United Kingdom, then businesses can't survive, and it's the government are just forcing everyone onto online. And supposedly that's fine. But if you're a small business, if you can't just park outside a shop for 10 minutes, or if you can no longer afford because your insurance has doubled or tripled, then it's destroying the small businesses, which are what the UK are really built on.
Well, you make your very valid points there. The important thing also to understand, again, I've done economic research to show ULEZ has damaged the GDP of London by £1 billion per year. Okay, so especially the nightlife, the restaurants, the theatre land, and all those sorts of things. And it's also not safe because we're not funding the police properly, and they're not doing the right job because they're doing woke things like attacking people, on free speech and all that sort of thing. But we mustn't just focus on London. Great, this is coming to a town or a city near you. In fact, it's already in lots of places like Bristol, Bath, Oxford, to some extent. Manchester avoided it for a piece of time. I'll give Andy Burnham his credit there, but I think it's going to come because the pressure from the green side of the argument is monumental. And because that makes you feel good, you feel cuddly. It's, oh, we're looking after the environment and our polar bears and all those sorts of things. The thing we've got to recognize is it's going to damage our economy, cripple our economy, and all of us are going to be affected. Even if you don't drive, it will impact on your lives. And this is the important thing. If we motivate drivers, incentivize drivers, and manage our roads properly, we can actually move on without actually damaging the environment one little bit. And I put my life on that. And I promise you that is possible. But the government don't want to do that because they see the easy solution. And bear in mind, they're only in government for 4.5 years or something like that. We need a long-term road user transport strategy. It should be 20 to 30 years. And we need to build roads that last 30 years, not ones that are just, fill up a pothole with a bit of a tarmac, bit of frost comes along, 3 months later, up it comes again. It's just stupid economics. And, I see so many businesses now not going into London, for example, now because they're not willing to pay the penalties, these congestion charges and ULEZ charges, just to go in to find out they quote for business or painting job, a plumbing job, they won't get it. And they've just spent something like 25 quid, 30 quid to get there to find out, no, they're not going to get it. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not worth it. Want to, as I said, want to finish on reform, and I'll not give my commentary. I want to hear your thoughts. You were in reform for a short time. You said you were apolitical, but you stood there, London mayoral candidate, and down in Kent. You've now left reform. Let's finish on that, on kind of what happened there and why you felt that you couldn't remain part of Reform UK.
It's an interesting time. I count on Richard Tice was running a Talk TV Sunday morning show, and we were doing a thing called Tice Gear every 2 or 3 weeks, which is a parody on Top Gear. And I was the guy, the expert that comes on to talk about and talking to people on the phone about problems regarding motoring and things, political problems like ULEZ and all the other bits and pieces. And I got to know Richard very well, and Richard said, fancy a coffee afterwards. And we had a coffee. He said, how would you like to stand for reform London mayor? And I didn't say yes then and there. It took me 2 to 3 months to say yes because I was apolitical. But because of the ULEZ expansion, and I sort of asked some close friends of mine in my Fairfield UK sort of close knit group, and they said, I think it'd be a good one for Fairfield UK to take on. So I said yes to that. And again, reform does stand for, in fact, I go back to 2015 in the Euro elections when Nigel and the gang were standing for European Parliament. Part of UKIP at the time, manifesto was to cut fuel duty by 20 pence, and I introduced that. And so I introduced some transport policies, which is still in Reform's transport policy now. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. The problem we had was we didn't have the resources, and Nigel wasn't the leader either. While I was standing as, I mean, I only got 3.5% of the vote. I got fantastic reception everywhere I went. I mean, some of the protests, I went to 50 ULEZ rallies, and people, were faking selfies, you name it. It was great. You felt loved. I wasn't attacked by anyone. That sort of thing. And the mayoral candidate for the Tory party wasn't as strong as it can either. So I thought, okay, let's do this. But you got to give Sadiq Khan, he is a brilliant, sort of electioneering guy, and he knows who to target and who to stand. And bear in mind, only 18% of the London voted for him. 18. I had 3%, and I came fifth out of about, I think, 14 different people. So I said yes to reform, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time doing it. But we didn't have enough money, we didn't have enough people on the ground to help and push it, and Nigel wasn't leader. So, that's what happened, and I learned a lot from it. But then Nigel decided to put his head above the parapet, and when Sunak ran to the hills and tried to, wrong foot reform, and put an early election in, which crippled his own people big time. His own MPs lost too many good people who I'm still in good contact with now. And Nigel and Richard said, why don't you stand for, we'll give you a choice of 3 constituencies. And Nigel said, probably the best thing to do is to stand in the front line of immigration. That's Dover and Deal. So I did. And I campaigned for 3.5 weeks and got 23% of the vote. If we had another 6-7 weeks, I think we could have nicked it. The Labour guy there, Mike Tapp, he was campaigning for 2.5 years down there. Yeah, and because we had Natalie Elphicke down there, don't we, in the Charlie Elphicke days, and Natalie moved across from Tories to Labour. So Conservatives had no chance down there whatsoever. Anyway, reason why I left was back in August of last year, after the election. I had an interview with Dan Wootton show, and bless him. And Dan said, where do you stand on Tommy Robinson? And yes, that's it. And I said, well, I don't know him from Adam. I don't know who he is, but I do actually congratulate him highlighting the rape gangs issue. And I put my hands together for that. I don't care about his background. And I didn't say I support him, but I respect him, and he should get credit for it, which is what Rupert Lowe says now, and which is an irony. Anyway, from that day onward doing that, not one person from Reform headquarters spoke to me. Okay. And about 4 or 5 days before I resigned, which is about 6 or 7 weeks ago now, I can't even remember myself now, but I got a text from a very senior person in Reform headquarters, which basically said this: Howard, if you continue to support Tommy Robinson, we'll have to expel you. And I said, what? What am I saying? I'm saying this guy's highlighted child rape gangs, and he should be given credit. And I said, right, bugger that. So I resigned. I'm not going to be, threatened with that about freedom of speech. And since then, I've also met Tommy for 2 hours in prison, which I'm not allowed to say anything because I'm had to sign an NDA. But it's safe to say, he's just hugely inspirational. He's not that well. You can imagine he's in solitary. What civil crime deserves to be in solitary? It just doesn't make sense. So, and I'm going to continue to say that what I'm saying now. But equally, I do believe reform is the only choice for this country still. But they better watch out and allow the grassroots supporters to have a thought process is not necessarily in agreement with the leadership. And that's the sad thing. I'm friends with Nigel. I'm friends with Richard. Probably not now. They probably can't stand what I am. But it's a very fickle business, and you've got to have a thick skin in politics. And maybe I'm not cut out for that, but I do stand on my own principles.
I couldn't agree with all that more. And as you mentioned, Rupert Lowe actually walks a very good line on this, very good line.
Great guy.
If only Nigel could repeat what Rupert says instead of getting angry at anyone who mentions the name Tommy, and he loses it. So, but we'll not. I could talk about this for hours, but I will not. I wanted to talk to you about the Motorists, because the great work you've done on that, and the campaigning you've done, and it's great that we have someone in our corner actually fighting for the rights of half of the UK. who have those driving licenses and actually use cars, and the many people who need to use a car. It's a requirement. It's not necessarily a choice because there isn't an option. So, Howard, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your background and the work you do. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and I will be launching a little poll coming out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So sign up; it's for free at fairfielduk.com, and you'll get an email next couple of weeks to ask really what do you think of the Labour Party's policies on anti-driver campaigns. So there you go.
Okay, well, if you're following Howard, make sure and follow him on X, and of course, look at the website and keep posted on what's happening, and you'll get that, and we'll certainly highlight that. So, Howard, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure.